Today on The Communicative Leader, we're chatting with General Manager and co-founder of Intelligent Relations, Steve Marcinuk. Steve is a serial entrepreneur, most currently embracing AI to elevate PR results. Steve talks to us about the intersection of leadership and problem solving, also discusses the importance of listening and embracing failure. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I know you will too. Hello and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah OH. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Steve, thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you about leadership and problem solving. But before we dive in, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, the path you took to get where you are today?
Yeah, so I've always identified as an entrepreneur. When I was 5 years old, I was the kid out with the lemonade stand selling, lemonade and cookies around the corner from my house. When I was 12, 13 years old, I started my first serious enterprise. I was essentially a birthday party clown, like doing balloons and magic and juggling, and so that was definitely like in my blood from from a very early age. And then I went to school, studied marketing and all of that, and found myself deep in the weeds of martech startups and marketing agencies. And around 3 years ago, someone who's now my co-founder and we started to get deep in the weeds on artificial intelligence. And we saw that this whole generative AI, where computers and AI algorithms would start to write really good text, that was probably going to be a thing. It wasn't really on the radar for a lot of folks just yet, but we saw that had some potential. And given my background in marketing and PR, we started with the question of how can we leverage this coming technology to impact industries that we know and love and care about. And that was the founding of Intelligent Relations, which is now an AI platform with a technology and team. We're a startup of about 60 people right now in 15 different countries. That's how that was started, with the question of how can we use this new technology to impact the PR industry. So that's a bit of a backstory.
Yeah, very cool. And I love that you can also see the leadership gene that you've had from early on and how you've continued to foster that and lean into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say entrepreneurship kind of came naturally to me, and leadership is something that I have continued to evolve into. Doing something on your own for yourself is a different skill set from having to get other people to buy into your vision and coordinate, and support them in their activities. So that's something that's been an active learning curve that I've learned a lot and still consistently trying to improve on.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. I feel like I should send you a check afterwards. I want you to talk to managers worldwide and acknowledging their different skill sets. And it's not intertwined, that we can see there's interdependence, but it is a skill that we can actively practice and always hone. So thank you.
Amen. Absolutely. I'm with you.
Yeah. Okay, so we know you're the head of operations at Intelligent Relations and a leader and innovator in the PR industry. And you don't get there without having to pivot, to consider alternatives, to return to the drawing board. So considering this, what can you tell us about the intersection of problem solving and leadership?
Yeah, so I think for me, as I alluded to, it started with a big, somewhat poorly defined question of how do you use AI to positively impact the PR industry. And anytime I have a complex question that's poorly defined, I try to break that problem down into small pieces and then try to solve each of those pieces independently with really well-defined tests. So for us, it's like, breaking down what is PR, what is the process of winning media coverage. I know this isn't necessarily the primary interest of your audience, so I'll give some examples that aren't super in the weeds. But for example, we have to figure out, what does a journalist care about? That would be one
Mm-hmm.
question. How do you
Yep.
write an email to that journalist and be like, hey, I
Mm-hmm.
think my teammate, my client has something of interest to say? Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's a different problem. How do you measure the results? And so
Mm-hmm.
the more you can break down a big, poorly
Mm-hmm.
defined question into small pieces and then tackle those one by one, it takes it makes the process easier and it makes it a whole lot more manageable as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you do a nice job of showing how much is involved in this process and the fact that there are steps that are independent, but we have to consider it as a whole.
I think
Um,
most
yeah,
problems seem overwhelming because
yeah,
they're either poorly defined or too big to tackle.
yeah.
So it's the old adage. It's kind of an unpleasant one, but like the saying is, "How do you eat an elephant? One spoon at a time, one bite at a
Mm-hmm.
time." You can
Yep.
update it to something less
Yeah,
visually
exactly.
unappealing, but
Yeah.
it is breaking it down and just doing each step one by one.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I love the link with PR because I think a lot of times, especially as of late, a lot of folks have started to see leading in a light of PR. And I mean that in the most positive sense, in thinking about audience analysis, in thinking about accommodating their own communication to fit the needs and the expectations of the audience, and being able to pivot and thinking about that persuasive frame. So, I mean, you lean into PR as much as you want to lean into PR with this conversation. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it
mhm,
is part of what we're doing. Part of what we're trying to support is getting
mhm,
leadership at different companies to build their own independent profiles. Not just you're not just doing
mhm.
it for your company, you're doing it for your executive brand building as well. So
Yeah,
there certainly is that tie-in.
yeah, excellent. So, considering your experiences, what do you see for most formal leaders? So, in a minute, I'm going to ask you about truly great leaders. But right now, I want us to think about, generally speaking, what do you see most formal leaders do in terms of engaging or managing problem solving?
Yeah, so I think the for me the uh, gateway to entry, the cost of admission is being able to have a vision, communicate it, and communicate what you're trying to do to get there. I think that's really
Mhm,
important. Especially one of the things that we're doing is we're we're building under uncertainty. We're in
mhm.
a fast moving industry. There's a lot of moving parts. As you mentioned,
Yeah.
we are trying, we are, failing and pivoting or
Mhm,
rather frequently. And so being able to communicate that vision to the team of like, this is what we're trying to do. This is why it's exciting. This is why you
mhm,
personally should
mhm,
care. That to me is fundamental to decent, good leadership. And then being
mhm.
able to communicate for an individual who's in the company what their part is in the bigger picture, why what you're doing matters. That's a combination. Those two things together allows anyone you're leading to be bought in to where they're going and have a sense of autonomy, ownership, for why what they're doing matters.
Yeah, yes, I love that. I always think that leadership is one of these things that can be really simple and it really should, but we make it really, really hard a lot of times because we put so much into it and there's so much stock and weight and fear and consequences and glory. But when you strip it down
Yeah,
to saying, a vision and then helping people to see how they're integral to this, I mean, those are two things that any manager can and should be doing. And thank you for calling those to our attention.
absolutely. Sure.
So we've looked at generally what managers, leaders tend to do. Now let's think of, in your experience, what are some of the truly great leaders? What are they doing in terms of engaging and managing problem solving?
Yeah, so I can speak to things that are probably both unique to us and common in a lot of
Hmm.
different companies, and that's leading under uncertainty. And
Hmm.
so for me, one of the things that helps to go from good to really great
Hmm.
is communicating around uncertainty. It's not just having that vision and knowing your part in it, but you know I'm an entrepreneur in my blood. I signed
Mm-hmm.
up for this. I signed up
Mm-hmm.
for the uncertainty. I'm very familiar with the fact that things are going to change. And whether it's, as an entrepreneur, or just someone who has a higher level perspective of everything that's
Mm-hmm.
happening in the company, generally as a leader, you have perspective and buy-in to a greater level of uncertainty than your
Mm-hmm.
team does. And so one of the things that happens under mediocre or poor leadership is that
Mm-hmm.
the folks who are maybe not as high up in the organization, they can very easily feel like jerked around, or like the leadership doesn't know what they're doing. We were doing this last week and now we're doing this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And from your perspective as the leader, it's very clear that didn't work. Now we're going on to the next thing. And you may have it perfectly clear in your mind
Yes.
why you're making these pivots. But I
Mm-hmm.
think getting ahead of that and communicating to the team, I would say something like this. Our goal is to increase the relevance of our pitches to these journalists, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We've looked at the options, and the data suggests that this thing we're trying now is probably the most likely to work. So, what we're going to do is for the next 3 weeks, we're going to test that. We're going to look at this data, we're going to evaluate it, and we're optimistic that that's going to work. But if and when it doesn't, then we'll go on to the next thing. And just giving
Mm-hmm.
people a perspective who aren't used
Mm-hmm.
to the rapid changes or the fact that a pivot might be coming,
Yeah.
that perspective allows them to know that, okay, things aren't chaotic and going poorly. This is just the team planning A to Z. A didn't
Mm-hmm.
work. Now we're on
Yep.
to B. Now we're on to
Yep.
C. And for me, that's been very effective in helping our
Mm-hmm.
team have confidence in the leadership team, because
Mm-hmm.
we've communicated that we're solving unknowns. We're going into uncharted territory. So for me, that's one big thing I'd focus on is how to communicate around that uncertainty, and it's made a big difference for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you hit on this idea, I think, of embracing uncertainty as a constant. And I think that helps to take the fear out of it.
Absolutely. And I think part of it also is being able to say I don't know
Mhm.
as a leader. And I think that our willingness to say I don't know as leaders, it helps to allow our team to say I don't know, and to present
Mhm.
that many people think that I don't know is the end or a block or a
Yeah.
scary thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know is a great jumping off point into
Mhm.
creativity and problem solving and getting the best out of your team. And that parlays into the importance of listening to the team.
Mhm.
So many leaders go in and they say, this is what we're doing. You're not trying to get buy-in, you're trying to get input. If all you're ever doing
Yeah.
is telling people what to do
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
saying, is how does that sound?
Yeah.
Good.
Get in line. Yeah.
I have my
Yeah.
doubts,
Yeah.
because we have
Mhm.
a culture that in our organization, whoever's closest to the problem
Mhm.
likely knows what's going on with that problem better than the
Yeah.
leadership. So
Yeah.
rather than
Mhm.
diving in and saying, you should solve this in this way, take a minute, listen,
Mhm.
ask them.
Yeah.
And if
Yep.
you have that culture of I don't know baked in, I don't know, but let's think about this together, you're probably going to get a lot better
Mhm.
input. You're likely to identify small problems before they become big problems.
Mhm.
And it's just, for me, one of the worst things that can happen in my organization would be that someone just does what I suggest because he's the boss or in a
Yep.
position of authority. And
Mhm.
like, you're making a mistake and you're doing it anyway because I said so.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not that's
Yep.
not the right approach in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I love so much of that. When you're talking about asking people, it made me think this one time I worked in industry before transitioning into higher ed, and it was a healthcare organization, and they were redesigning surgical suites. And so I was in a boardroom with most folks had MBAs. There was one medical doctor who's a chief medical officer, but he was a primary care physician, so hadn't done surgery since his training, 3 decades before. And I literally was laughing out loud because I thought it was a joke. I'm like, we can't design a surgical suite. None of us have done surgery. And if we were involved in surgery, we are under anesthetics. So we certainly don't have any knowledge here. But, it wasn't a joke. they, they did eventually bring other individuals, opinion leaders, those who are doing the work to the table. But I certainly have experienced what you're saying, and it's talk about disconnect.
Yeah. And part of that is as a leader, uh, I think I first of all, I should not be the smartest person in any room. If I think I am, I'm either delusional or have an arrogance problem, or I've built the wrong team, God forbid. But that's not usually the case. But I think, recognizing that you need to get the input from different folks, and then also taking the time to go in and understand each person's role well enough that you can have intelligent conversations about it. One, it helps you manage the process better, but two, it also shows a genuine interest in what they're doing, and they feel that.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, if you're not necessarily the smartest, but you know a little bit about what each person does, that positions you, I think, where I see the opportunity as a leader is to be the most prepared. And for me, that's part of the leadership style that I try to embody, is that as I said, I may not be the most qualified in each aspect, but if I'm going into each meeting with a relatively clear idea of what we're trying to get out of it, a loose agenda, being the most prepared person going into a meeting is a great way to show respect for your team and a great way to ensure you're hitting some of your outcomes with the team's buy-in.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I love that. And that idea of demonstrating respect instead of saying, of course I respect you, and showing it in many tangible ways. And that's one of them.
Sure. We have engineers who are, we have real AI engineers with master's degrees in artificial intelligence who will always know so much more about AI than I do.
Yeah.
But I've spent a significant amount of time diving into the weeds and trying to do the prompt generation. I'm taking, private classes with the tutor to understand the API calls and the structures of these things. And I'm taking little side classes on, how to do better project management with certain kinds of engineering teams. And it's making a difference in the team. I'll say, one, performatively, it's making the process more effective, but also the team is recognizing that, okay, Steve's trying to level up, and good for
Yeah.
him. He doesn't come from our background. He doesn't
Yeah.
have the masters in this thing, but
Yep.
I have trust in him as a leader because he himself is demonstrating growth and investment, and that helps.
Oh, yeah. And modeling this lifelong learning and showing that's part of the culture. And yeah, so many incredibles going on, Steve. I'm so excited. I'm just geeking out with your leadership style here.
Certainly trying. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly trying.
Yeah. It shows. So we've talked about some of these benefits of embracing the pivot and change. But let's look at the alternative. So, what is the cost of ineffective problem solving, whether in teams, leaders, or organizations?
Yeah, so we touched on some of these issues, and I think it's you have a team that falls in line rather than speaking up and giving their input, and that's a huge loss. That results in learning lessons slower. When you're operating under uncertainty, building under uncertainty, it's okay to fail, but you ideally, I believe you want to fail quickly and learn quickly, because the
Yep.
more times you can go through that cycle of fail, learn, pivot, try again, you're going to get to a better out. You're going to get to something that works, a better outcome sooner. So I think without uh, without practicing some of these things we're talking about, you're just going to be slow and bouncing around, and you're not going to get the input you need from the team to know when you are making a mistake. You're going to be flying blind, and your team, in a best case scenario, are they're your best sounding board. Customers and clients, those are the folks who we usually think of as our stakeholders and the people who are, from whom we learn. But you have a built-in group of folks who are ostensibly invested in the success of the company right there working with you.
Yep.
And those are the folks you want to be. Much better to learn the lesson from your internal team before you learn it from someone outside who's like, yeah, you're failing in this, I'm going to enter a contract. It's like, I bet your associate, your analyst
Yeah.
probably saw that coming
Yeah.
earlier.
Yep.
And so it even has an impact on revenue, and in most businesses as well.
Yeah. And two, for thinking about that employee experience as well, if that analyst kind of had an inkling, gosh, I'm not sure, or these tests aren't where I would like to see them, having built-in structures where they know can report that and should report, and they're part of that process. I mean, that
Yeah.
culture, that's an organization I want to work in. That's an organization I
Yeah.
want my kids to work in, right?
That structure piece, I
Mhm.
think, is really critical and a great
Mhm.
thing to highlight on, because it's something that I'm still very much learning is that I have role power, and
Mhm.
folks are often afraid to speak up to someone who has role power,
Mhm.
and I might not get the best feedback directly, even though I say
Yep.
and I mean it.
Yep.
I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or
Mhm.
concerns. Feel free, shoot me an email,
Mhm.
message on Slack. That doesn't
Yep.
that doesn't work for everybody.
Mhm.
Often the people who do speak up, it's a personality driven thing. So you're getting a
Mhm.
self-selected group of people who are
Mhm.
willing to raise their
Mhm.
hand and be vocal. And often every personality type
Yeah.
has valuable things to say. And
Mhm.
often the quieter, more thoughtful people are the
Mhm.
ones you want to hear from. And so if it's not, you got to make, yeah,
Mhm.
you want to make sure you have the structures and the systems in place to make sure that those voices are heard. Otherwise, again, you're missing out on those opportunities.
Mhm. And I love your when you brought up failure, because a lot of people see that as that's a dirty word. We don't say that. We don't do that. And what a loss, right? Because as you're saying, if you handle failure well and you fail forward, and something from the literature, the idea, let's figure out what happened here. Let's figure out how we do better. Is this truly a failure, or do we just not meet the goal we set? We go through and then we make a new plan. A lot of times, as you're saying, then we have innovation, we have creativity, we may have some self efficacy that comes from, oh, that was really hard, but we did it. As
Yeah.
opposed to saying, ooh, failure, let's sweep it under the rug or pretend it didn't happen or feel shame for it.
Yeah. If I may, two thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on that. One is that it's the fear of failure is deeply instilled in a lot of people. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm still navigating the best way to communicate that to the team.
Mm-hmm.
I think that candid communication is a very positive thing in most organizations,
Mm-hmm.
but some people, that could be a triggering word. If I were to say, hey, our first
Mm-hmm.
attempt at this failed,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, that doesn't hit me in a
Yeah.
personal way.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't trigger anything in me, but
Mm-hmm.
to someone who's looking to us to lead and to provide a certain sense of stability,
Mm-hmm.
does that trigger, I did a bad job? Does that
Mm-hmm.
trigger the company is going to end up downsizing because of
Mm-hmm.
failure could mean a lot of things. And so it's something that
Mm-hmm.
I'm still learning the right way to communicate that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you have specific thoughts on it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's perhaps delicate.
It is really delicate. And I think a lot of it is, like you said, knowing the audience. I always say, even distressing news is palatable if it is delivered in an audience centered and timely manner. So I would be mindful of that. So it's not something that comes out later where they think, oh, that went well. Okay, we're moving on. Oh, just kidding. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the more that senior leadership can talk about it and find ways to even celebrate it and saying, this is where we were, but look where we are now. Like that pitch or that prompt or that algorithm did not work out the way we thought, but we were able to get here now. So I think just including that in your daily rhetoric as leaders is exemplifying that. It takes time, but I think those steps are what can help you to change how others in your organization respond to that word.
Yeah, that resonates. That definitely resonates. I'll say one other thing. It's an exercise. I think I'm attributing this properly from a book, Black Box Thinking,
Oh, mhm,
and it's the idea of forecasting failure. So sometimes the idea is to how do you best anticipate what's likely to go wrong and
mhm,
avoid those things? Can you
yep,
predict failure in advance? And the
mhm,
way that you frame that as a leader um, typically be, so any concerns about this, any doubts, what do we
yep,
think about this, we think this
mhm,
is likely to work, and that's
mhm,
one way. But
mhm,
asking the question, I do this sometimes for big initiatives, is okay, so team, I think we got it, this makes sense, now let's forecast it 6 months from now and it didn't work. And we're sitting here, it's June now, or it's July, and then in 6 months we're coming up to the end of the year, and we're having that regroup meeting of what went wrong. What would you think are the things that are most likely to be the culprit behind this failure?
Yep.
And getting people into that mindset of, oh, well, I think it was that we didn't have the right team, we didn't have the right resources, that type of thing. Often it can get, just asking better questions and allowing them to forecast failure in advance allows you, one, to make failure part of the culture. It's part of
Yeah.
what we do, and also to ask to solicit better input around likely failures before they happen. And so if you can
Yeah.
we said before, best case is you learn, you fail quickly and learn.
Yep.
Even better would be, can you fail in advance and
Yeah.
just get
Yeah.
that out of the way and skip
Yeah.
that step, because that's
Yeah.
even better. So
Yes. I
for me,
love that.
that's game-changing exercise that I personally
Yeah.
love.
So powerful. Yeah. You're right. Fail in advance. Like, let's just, sidestep that one.
Sure.
Awesome. Steve, I have two more questions for you. So, this first one, what are two leadership lessons you've learned and you find yourself returning to?
Yeah, so a super practical one, and then one that's a little bit more abstract. So super practical, anytime that we have a human affecting decision to
Mm-hmm.
communicate, we always do that, in a verbal conversation, one-on-one, or in a
Mm-hmm.
small group,
Yeah.
rather than just sending the email. This could be an
Mm-hmm.
offer for a promotion. This could be saying you're
Mm-hmm.
going to have a new client to manage. This could
Mm-hmm.
be, a reprimand of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
We've gotten that even for client proposals. We have found that so much communication gets lost in written transcripts. And
Mm-hmm.
we had a candidate who we almost lost. We were going to give him a promotion,
Mm-hmm.
but he almost turned down the promotion because he had a lot of doubts about what that would mean in his workload and things. And
Mm-hmm.
normally I would think, many people might think, here's good news,
Yeah.
congratulations, here's the
Yeah.
job description,
Exactly.
here's the more money.
Yeah.
But he had a lot of concerns that if we didn't, set up a call, here's the letter we're going to send. We
Mm-hmm.
want to talk it through and want to hear your feedback before we send
Mm-hmm.
it across. That saved us a lot of, quietly upset teammates and
Yeah.
lost proposals, because
Mm-hmm.
same thing with the proposal, rather than just sending it off and hoping they say yes,
Mm-hmm.
clients have doubts, they have
Mm-hmm.
uncertainties. So you
Mm-hmm.
always want to communicate things that affect people in real
Mm-hmm.
time, in my perspective, that because you're going to get the feedback and talk through objections or challenges as they come up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing, if you want to, the other thing is just finding the leadership style that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had a lot of doubts and uncertainty around stepping into more leadership roles as someone who does a lot of my best work quietly by myself,
Mm-hmm.
not in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of leadership that's most visible for people is, loud, authoritative, and very hyper
Mm-hmm.
confident all the time in
Yep.
front of great, big
Mm-hmm.
audiences. And that's not everybody.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
personally, I discovered the Enneagram. That's
Mm-hmm.
a modeling tool that talks
Yep.
about different personalities. And I started to do some reading on my personality type, and I just started to realize and adapt to, oh, well, my leadership style looks more like this,
Mm-hmm.
and that works. And doubling down on that, you got to cultivate new skills a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of different ways to lead, and
Mm-hmm.
I find I'm getting more comfortable in my own skin as a leader by just
Yeah.
embracing that my style works too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's so powerful. And I really like that idea of authenticity and saying, what are my
Yeah,
natural gifts and my skills and my tendencies? And how do I harness those to help others, to align others, to innovate?
absolutely.
Yeah. Because I even work with students and saying, oh, I think I should be this type of leader. Or when I'm consulting, like, I'm going to try and do that. I'm like, that feels like performance, right? I'm going to try
Yeah,
and be is not who you are.
yeah,
So we don't want this to feel performative. You want to feel like yourself in this role. So,
yeah,
and your team wants
absolutely.
you to feel like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I, we have a 2-year-old kid, and we actually had a conversation. It's a different kind of leadership, family, leading in the family.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
we talked about like, we don't want to be performative parents. We don't
Hmm.
want to be, doing this in a way that's supposed to impress others or make people think a
Hmm.
certain way. I think it's best for even in that very different kind of environment. That's not what the kid
100%.
needs, is
Hmm.
someone who's pretending to have, yeah, it's like we're figuring that out too,
Hmm.
There's always
Yeah.
challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. I have learned more since becoming a parent about leadership than all the
Yeah.
years, all through my PhD before
Hmm.
I had the kiddos,
Yeah.
and really seeing the impact of it now.
Hmm.
So now I encourage you to continue to do that because it serves you well. And that's one thing we
Yeah.
love on the Communicative Leader is when we think about leadership, when we think about our communication, certainly we can make changes at work that fit us, but we become better parents and partners and neighbors and community members as well.
Amen. Yep.
So, our last question for you, Steve. What advice do you have for employees of all levels, ranks, industries in terms of embracing the unknown, becoming comfortable with the pivots, and anything else related to leadership and problem solving?
Yeah. So I'd say first, it's embrace the fact that you're going to be off track often. You embrace, for me, it's the
Mhm,
metaphor of the airplane that they say that, the airline going from New York to California is off
mhm,
course 90%, 99% of the time
mhm.
because it's constantly knows where it's going, but it's constantly off track. Just
Yeah.
recalibrate. It's not a
Yep.
big mistake. It's not a
Mhm,
giant error. You're just,
mhm.
keep going,
Yep.
pivot, adjust, know where
Yep.
you're going, and just keep
Mhm.
recalibrating. That to me is a much healthier way of framing, am I winning, losing? It's just
Yeah.
you're off track a little bit.
Mhm.
So that. And then
Yep.
the other thing, it's something I've started to embrace, is that in especially under uncertainty, you're gonna encounter stress and things
Mhm.
that freak you out or seem
Mhm.
overwhelming. And
Mhm.
so what I say to myself and my team is, um, you, you just need to uh, like lower the stakes and shorten the time frame.
Mm.
So if you think that something seems like a really big deal, like rather than thinking how is this decision going to impact 2 or 3 months from now, it's like let's
Mhm.
just bring it down. Like this new
Mhm.
client engagement seems really complicated, and like what
Mhm.
if they don't like that? Focus on the onboarding. Just
Mhm.
do a decent job with the onboarding.
Yep.
And sometimes, honestly, I don't know if a lot of people would agree with me, but for me, lowering the stakes rather
Mhm.
than saying I have to rock this and this is going to
Mhm.
be great. And sometimes psyching yourself up can help, but
Yeah.
sometimes being like, my goal is, rather than making this the most happy client I've ever worked with over the next six
Mhm.
months, my job is to do an 80% good onboarding with this client, and
Mhm.
I'll worry about that next thing next,
Yep.
because I can't
Mhm.
think about all the ramifications of this and take the pressure off. So just shorten the
Mm.
time frame, lower the
Mhm.
stakes, be a little
Yep.
kinder to yourself, and you'll get to
Yep.
the next thing soon enough.
Yeah, exactly. And it frees up, like you're saying, so much cognitive space
Yeah.
to focus on that first step in a concentrated way.
Yeah. It's helped me in a lot of situations that otherwise could have felt overwhelming.
Steve, thanks for joining us today on the Communicative Leader. I've really learned so much from you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciated it.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.